My golden brother and his wife tried to kick me out of my own house, which I paid for myself, so I evicted them instead, and I never thought I'd be dealing with this kind of mess. I'm 27 years old, a software engineer with a solid career, and the last thing I ever expected was to feel like an outsider in my own house. But here we are. About a year ago, I bought a 3-bedroom house in Springfield, Ohio. It's nothing extravagant, just a cozy, modern place with a little backyard and enough room for me and the family I invited to live with me. My parents, Carol and Gary. My parents are both retired teachers. They spent most of their lives in Hudsonville, a quiet rural town about 2 hours away from the city, where life was predictable and slow. But once retirement hit, they decided they'd had enough of that. My mom kept saying things like, "We're too young to just sit around waiting for the grass to grow." And my dad, well, he just went along with whatever my mom wanted. At first, I thought their idea to move to the city made sense. Springfield isn't exactly a bustling metropolis, but it's livelier than Hudsonville. I figured it would do them some good to be closer to restaurants, shopping, and people their age. Plus, the city worked better for me career-wise, and I'm not going to lie, I wanted to help them out. They did so much for me growing up, so giving them a place to live rent-free felt like the least I could do. I didn't hesitate when I found this house. I was proud of it. It's got 3 bedrooms, a walk-in closet in the master, and an attached bathroom. Exactly what I needed for privacy and comfort since I work from home most of the time. Once we moved in, I made sure everything was set up the way I wanted it. The master bedroom, naturally, was mine. I paid for the house, so it only made sense that I got the best room. The second bedroom became my home office. I work from home around 80% of the time, and as a software engineer, I needed the space to be functional. I invested in dual monitors, a solid ergonomic chair, and everything else to make the space perfect for me. The third bedroom? That was a guest room. I figured we could use it when family came to visit. Simple enough. At first, everything was fine. My parents were happy to be in the city, and I thought we'd fallen into a nice little routine. Carol, my mom, spent her time gardening in the small backyard. She liked to grow vegetables and raise garden beds and claimed it reminded her of Hudsonville. Gary, my dad, mostly stuck to his recliner, watching baseball games or reruns of old shows on TV. They seemed happy, and honestly, so was I. I worked during the day, covered all the bills, stocked the fridge, and didn't mind taking care of the house. After all, it was my place. I was proud of it. I didn't mind paying for everything because I made good money. 6 figures, which I don't say to brag, but to explain why I didn't feel like it was a burden. My parents lived on their modest pensions, so I never even thought to ask them to pitch in. Family doesn't charge family rent, right? At least, that's what I told myself. Things were simple, calm, and predictable. But calm never lasts forever, does it? The first sign of trouble came one morning over breakfast. I was sitting at the kitchen table, halfway through my coffee and a piece of toast, when my mom casually dropped a bombshell. "You know," she said, in the kind of light tone people use when they're trying to downplay something, "your brother Evan and Paige are thinking about moving to Springfield." I froze for a second, but tried to play it off. "Oh yeah? Why's that?" "They're having a rough time back in Hudsonville," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Paige is pregnant, and Evan thinks there are better opportunities here." I should explain. Evan is my older brother by 2 years. He's always been the golden boy in my mom's eyes. He's charismatic, easygoing, and has this way of making people feel bad for him even when he's in the wrong. Growing up, he skated by on charm while I was the one who did the work, got the good grades, and played by the rules. Our dynamic never changed as adults. I don't dislike him. I mean, he's my brother. But I learned early on that helping Evan usually meant bailing him out of whatever mess he got himself into. And Paige, his wife? She's something else. She's nice enough on the surface, but she has this entitled streak that's hard to ignore. I'm not saying this to be mean, but I've known her long enough to know that when Paige wants something, she gets it, no matter how unreasonable it might be. Combine that with the fact that she's pregnant, and I could already see where this conversation was heading. Still, I brushed it off. "Well, good for them," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "I'm sure they'll figure things out." My mom smiled in this weird, knowing way that made me pause. She didn't say anything else, though. and I let the subject drop. I figured Evan and Paige might move into an apartment in Springfield, and that would be that. I didn't think it had anything to do with me, but I was wrong. About a week later, I came home from running errands to find Evan and Paige standing in the living room, surrounded by bags and boxes. Paige was holding a small duffel in one hand and resting her other hand on her pregnant belly, while Evan was setting up a fan in the corner like he'd already made himself at home. My parents were there too, looking far too pleased with themselves. "Surprise," my mom said with a big smile. "Evan and Paige are here." I blinked, trying to process what I was looking at. "What do you mean here?" I asked slowly, looking from my parents to Evan and Paige. "They're going to stay with us for a little while," my mom explained. "Just until they get back on their feet." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. Evan grinned at me like this was no big deal. "Hey man, hope this isn't too much trouble." Too much trouble? I wanted to say, "Are you kidding me?" But instead, I just stood there in stunned silence. My brain was trying to catch up with the fact that not only had they moved into my house without even asking me, but everyone here seemed to think this was completely normal. "They'll stay in the guest room," my mom added, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They just invited Evan and Paige to move into my house without even consulting me. I should have said something right then and there, but I didn't. I don't know if I was too shocked or too polite to start an argument in front of everyone, but I just let it slide. Looking back, I wish I'd spoken up sooner, because that moment, the one where I didn't say no, was the beginning of the end. The first few days after Evan and Paige moved in were tolerable, barely. I tried to tell myself it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, it's family, right? You make sacrifices for family. But every time I walked into the living room and saw Paige lounging on my couch, shoes off, feet up, like she owned the place, the irritation started bubbling up. Evan wasn't any better. He'd spread his stuff everywhere. His duffel bag in the hallway, clothes thrown over chairs, and his old gym shoes by the front door, filling the place with that familiar, unpleasant smell. It wasn't just their presence, it was their attitude. They acted like they belonged here, like this house was suddenly theirs too, without so much as a thank you or a single offer to help out. The guest room, my guest room, was already overflowing with their things. Paige had brought boxes of baby clothes, supplies, and random junk she apparently couldn't live without. Evan, meanwhile, dumped his stuff wherever he felt like it. It was clear they had no intention of keeping their stay temporary, no matter what my mom had promised me. On top of that, Paige's little, harmless comments started to get under my skin. "This house is so nice," she said one afternoon as she folded baby blankets on the couch. "It must take so much effort to keep it clean by yourself." I glanced up from my laptop, where I was trying to work. "It's not that hard," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She smiled sweetly, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. "Well, once the baby's here, things are going to get messy. We'll need a lot of space for all the baby stuff." I didn't respond. I knew where this was going, and I didn't want to engage. I'd already decided that as long as they stayed in the guest room, I could put up with it. But part of me knew I was just lying to myself. Then came the evening that pushed me over the edge. It was about a week after they'd moved in, and I was winding down after a long day of work. I'd spent hours on back-to-back calls, staring at my screen, troubleshooting bugs, and all I wanted to do was relax. I walked into the living room, only to find Paige and Evan sitting there waiting for me, like they'd been plotting this moment all day. "Hey, Alex," Paige started, her voice syrupy sweet. "Can we talk to you about something?" I immediately tensed up. "About what?" Paige exchanged a look with Evan, who cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, we've been thinking," Evan said, leaning forward. "It'd make a lot more sense if we took the master bedroom." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What?" Paige smiled, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Well, with the baby coming and all, we're going to need more space. The guest room is nice, but it doesn't have a closet. And the master bedroom has the walk-in closet and the private bathroom, which would be perfect for us." I blinked at them, trying to process what I was hearing. "You want 'em room?" Evan shrugged, as if the request was no big deal. "It just makes sense, man. You've got the office, so it's not like you're short on space. And it's just a bedroom, right?" I could feel my blood boiling. Just a bedroom? The bedroom that I paid for in the house that I bought? No, I said firmly, crossing my arms. You can stay in the guest room. That's what it's there for. Paige's smile faltered. But there's no closet in there, she said, her tone more annoyed now. Where are we supposed to put all the baby's stuff? I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. That's not my problem. I'm not giving up my room. You're welcome to the guest room, or you can find somewhere else to stay. Evan looked taken aback, like he couldn't believe I was saying no. Dude, come on, he said, his voice turning defensive. We're family. You don't think you could make a small sacrifice for us? A small sacrifice? I shot back, my voice sharper now. I bought this house. I pay the mortgage. I pay for the utilities, the groceries, everything. You're living here for free, and now you think you can take my bedroom? Are you serious? Paige crossed her arms, glaring at me. It's not like you need this space, she muttered, as if that justified everything. I don't care, I said, standing up. I already told you no. The guest room is plenty big, and if you don't like it, you can leave. The room went silent. Evan looked pissed, like I just insulted his pride. But Paige's face said it all. She was offended, like I'd personally wronged her. This isn't over, she muttered as she stood up and stormed off toward the guest room. Evan shot me one last glare before following her, leaving me standing alone in the living room, seething. I sat back down on the couch, trying to calm myself. I couldn't believe their audacity. They'd moved into my house, hadn't offered to pay for anything, hadn't even asked if I was okay with them staying, and now they thought they could just take my bedroom? Who does that? But I wasn't giving in. Not this time. The next couple of days, the tension in the house was unbearable. Evan and Paige were avoiding me, but I could still hear them talking behind closed doors, their voices hushed but angry. My mom, Carol, was acting weird too. She wasn't saying much, but every time I walked into the kitchen, she gave me this disappointed look, like I was the one being unreasonable. Then, it escalated. One morning, I had to go into the office for a few hours. Normally, I work from home, but there was a big meeting I couldn't miss. When I left, everything was where it should be. My office was tidy, and my bedroom door was closed, like always. When I came back around lunchtime, the first thing I noticed was my stuff. My clothes, my shoes, my laptop, all of it was piled haphazardly in the hallway. My computer monitor was unplugged and leaning against the wall. My heart started pounding as I realized what was happening. I marched to my bedroom and froze. Paige was standing in the middle of the room, halfway through packing up my things. My bed, was stripped bare, and a pile of baby blankets and stuffed animals sat where my pillows used to be. She looked up when she saw me, completely unfazed. "Oh, hey, Alex," she said, as if this was normal. "I was just finishing up. What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Your mom said we could start moving in," she replied nonchalantly. "The baby's coming soon, and we need the space." I felt my hands clench into fists. My mom said, "This is my house, my bedroom. You don't get to just decide to take it." Paige looked at me like I was the unreasonable one. "It's just a bedroom," she said dismissively. That was it. I'd had enough. "No," I said sharply, stepping into the room. "Get your stuff out of here. Now." "You're not moving into my room." Paige's calm facade finally cracked, and she crossed her arms, scowling. "We need the space, Alex. You're being selfish." "Selfish?" I nearly laughed. "I pay for everything. The house, the bills, the food, you name it. And now you think you can kick me out of my own bedroom? You've got 5 minutes to get your stuff out of here before I start throwing it in the yard." Her face turned red, and she stormed past me, muttering something under her breath. I didn't care. I was done being the nice guy, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The day after I caught Paige in my bedroom felt like the calm before a storm, but I knew better than to think it would just blow over. Evan and Paige spent most of the day holed up in the guest room, their voices muffled through the walls as they whispered to each other. My parents, on the other hand, walked around the house like nothing had happened, which somehow irritated me even more. By the time dinner rolled around, the tension was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. I stayed in my office for most of the day, working and trying to cool off, but deep down I knew I couldn't let this slide. I had been crystal clear with everyone. My bedroom was mine. The fact that Paige felt entitled to pack up my stuff without permission was the last straw. The real kicker came that evening when I went into the kitchen to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge, already annoyed, but my frustration only got worse when I realized it was nearly empty. And I mean empty. Just 2 days ago, I had stocked it full. Chicken, vegetables, snacks, everything to last us through the week. Now there was nothing but a few condiments, half a bottle of milk, and an expired yogurt shoved in the back. I checked the freezer, same story. I stood there for a moment, seething. I already knew what had happened. Evan and Paige had helped themselves to everything without bothering to ask. I slammed the fridge door shut and turned around to see my mom standing at the stove, calmly stirring a pot. "Where's all the food?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Oh," my mom said without turning around. "Paige made dinner for everyone earlier." "Everyone but me, apparently." "Great," I muttered. "So what am I supposed to eat?" She finally turned to face me, her expression oddly indifferent. "There's still some bread and peanut butter in the pantry," she said. "But you know, Alex, if you're not going to help out the family, you can't expect us to cater to you." I froze, the words hitting me like a slap in the face. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. She shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "You don't want to help Evan and Paige out, so don't expect us to include you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I paid for everything in this house. I was the one who bought the groceries they were so casually eating. And now, because I wouldn't let Evan and Paige bulldoze me out of my own bedroom, I was being iced out of the family meal? "You can't be serious," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "I'm the one who's paying for all of this. The house, the food, the bills, everything. And you're telling me I don't deserve to eat with you?" She turned back to the stove like she hadn't just said something completely insane. "We're a family, Alex," she said calmly. "And families make sacrifices. Paige is pregnant. Evan's trying to get back on his feet. You have a good job and everything you need. Why can't you just make this easier for everyone?" I couldn't even respond. My blood was boiling, and my mind was racing with thoughts of all the sacrifices I'd already made. I bought this house with my money. I let my parents live here for free. I covered every single expense without asking for a thing in return. And now I was being made out to be the bad guy? I turned on my heel and left the kitchen, slamming my office door behind me. I didn't want to hear another word from anyone. Later that night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I'd had enough. For weeks, I'd been biting my tongue, letting them walk all over me. But this was the final straw. My mom had made it clear that she wasn't on my side. She was so wrapped up in helping Evan and Paige that she couldn't see how unfair they were being to me. And Evan and Paige? They weren't going to stop pushing boundaries unless I did something to stop them. I pulled out my laptop and started researching eviction notices. I didn't know much about the legal side of things, but I was determined to figure it out. By midnight, I had the documents ready. I printed out 2 copies, one for Evan and Paige and one for my parents. It felt surreal, putting my own family's names on eviction notices, but at that point, it didn't feel like I had a choice. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, adrenaline still pumping through my veins from the night before. I grabbed the eviction notices from my desk and marched into the living room, where Evan and Paige were lounging on the couch. Evan looked up when he saw me, frowning. "What's up?" I didn't say a word. I walked over to the coffee table and slapped the papers down in front of them. "What's this?" Evan asked, picking up the papers and scanning them. "It's an eviction notice," I said flatly. "You have 24 hours to pack your stuff and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police." Paige gasped like I just hit her. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," I shot back. "I've had enough of this. You've been freeloading here for weeks without contributing a single thing, and now you're trying to take my bedroom? No, I'm done." Evan stood up, his face turning red. "You can't just throw us out. We're family. Family doesn't take advantage of each other," I snapped. "I let you stay here because I thought you needed help, but you've done nothing but disrespect me. If you can't follow my rules and respect my space, you're out." Paige started crying, and Evan looked like he wanted to punch something, but I didn't care. I wasn't backing down. Alex, my mom's voice rang out behind me. I turned to see her standing at the edge of the living room, holding the second set of eviction notices I'd printed out. What is this? It's exactly what it looks like, I said, crossing my arms. You've got 30 days to find somewhere else to live. If things don't change, I'll be taking legal action. My mom looked like I just punched her in the gut. You don't mean that, she said, her voice breaking. I do, I replied. I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter in my own house. I pay for everything here, and you still think it's okay to let Evan and Paige walk all over me. I'm done. The room fell into silence. My dad, who'd been quietly sitting in his recliner, didn't say a word. Evan glared at me, Paige cried, and my mom looked heartbroken. But I didn't care. I'd spent weeks putting up with their entitlement, their demands, and their total lack of respect, and I wasn't going to do it anymore. You have 24 hours, I said again, looking directly at Evan and Paige. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the cops. Without another word, I turned around and walked back to my office, slamming the door behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally taking control. The house was silent after I dropped the eviction notices. It wasn't the kind of peaceful silence you get after a good day. It was the quiet you hear before something blows up. I sat in my office, door closed, trying to focus on work, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept replaying the look on my mom's face when she saw those papers, like I'd betrayed her. I couldn't shake it, even though I knew I was doing the right thing. Evan and Paige were furious. No surprise there. I heard them whispering loudly in the guest room, voices carrying just enough for me to pick up snippets of their complaints. He can't actually kick us out, Evan muttered. We're family. Who does this? Paige snapped, her voice cracking as she paced. I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. I was fed up, but part of me still felt bad. Maybe it's because it was so ingrained in me that family was supposed to stick together no matter what. My parents had always preached that, and for most of my life, I believed it. But what was I supposed to do when family treated me like a doormat? By lunchtime, my mom knocked on my office door. Alex, she said softly, peeking her head inside. Can we talk? I sighed and swiveled my chair to face her. Yeah, come in. She stepped in and closed the door behind her, which immediately put me on edge. I knew that look on her face. She was about to try and reason with me. My mom always had this way of making things sound like they weren't a big deal, even when they absolutely were. Honey, she started, her voice gentle. Don't you think you're overreacting just a little? I crossed my arms. No, Mom, I don't. She sat down in the chair across from me, clasping her hands in her lap. I understand you're frustrated, but kicking your brother and Paige out, it's too much. She's pregnant, Alex. They need our help. I've been helping them, I shot back. I let them move into my house without asking. I've been paying for everything. Food, utilities, the mortgage, and now they think they can take my bedroom too? How is that fair? She sighed, her shoulders sagging. It's not about fair, Alex. Family helps family when they're in need. Evan's just going through a rough patch right now. I scoffed. When isn't Evan going through a rough patch? He always finds himself in these situations, and you and Dad always bail him out. And this time, you're doing it at my expense. My mom's face fell. For a split second, I thought she was actually going to admit I was right, but instead, she tried a different angle. You have so much, Alex. A good job, a beautiful house, your health. Evan hasn't been as lucky. That's not my fault, I said firmly. I worked hard for everything I have. I saved up, I bought this house, and I take care of it. I'm not about to give up my room or my peace of mind because Evan and Paige can't get their lives together. Her eyes glistened like she was about to cry. We're not trying to take anything from you, honey. We just thought you'd want to help. I did want to help, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. But this isn't helping. This is letting them take advantage of me. And you're okay with it? My mom didn't respond right away. She just sat there, staring at her hands. I could see the guilt on her face, but at the same time, she still didn't seem to understand how much this situation had pushed me. Mom, I said after a moment, softer now, I'm not backing down on this. I'm tired of being treated like my boundaries don't matter. If Evan and Paige can't respect me, they need to leave. End of story. She looked up at me, her expression resigned. Okay, she said quietly, standing up. I'll talk to your father. As she left the room, I exhaled slowly, feeling both relieved and drained. I knew my mom wasn't happy, and I hated that it had come to this, but I wasn't going to let guilt talk me out of doing what I knew was right. By mid-afternoon, Evan finally came looking for me. He knocked once, then barged into my office without waiting for a response. Typical. Seriously, Alex? He said, waving the eviction notice in his hand like it was some kind of joke. You're really kicking us out? You have 24 hours, I replied without looking up from my monitor. That's more than fair. He scoffed, stepping closer. You can't be serious, man. We're family. You don't throw family out on the street. I'm not throwing you out on the street, I said, finally meeting his glare. You can stay in the guest room, like I told you before, as long as you respect my boundaries. But if you can't do that, you need to leave. Evan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small room like a caged animal. How are we supposed to respect you when you're acting like this? Paige is pregnant, Alex. She needs space. She needs comfort. And you're being selfish about a stupid bedroom. I clenched my jaw. You're calling me selfish? You moved in without asking, ate all my food, and tried to kick me out of my own room in the house I bought and pay for. If anyone's being selfish, it's you. Evan's face turned red, and I could see he wanted to argue more, but for once, he didn't have a response. He just shook his head and stormed out, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Paige stayed locked in the guest room, probably crying, while Evan sulked in the living room. My parents avoided me entirely, which was fine by me. I needed the space. That evening, when I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, my dad was sitting alone at the table, staring at nothing. I paused for a second, wondering if I should say something, but he beat me to it. You know, he said quietly without looking up, your brother's not a bad guy. He needs help sometimes. I tightened my grip on the glass. I've been helping him, Dad. More than enough. He sighed and looked up at me. Maybe so, but this is going to change things, you know? For the family. I stared at him for a moment, trying to figure out if he was warning me or guilt-tripping me. If by change things you mean Evan and Paige will finally learn to take responsibility for their own lives, then good. That's exactly what needs to happen. My dad didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like he didn't have the energy to keep pushing. That night, I lay in bed listening to the faint sounds of Evan and Paige packing their things. I didn't know whether they would actually leave in the morning or try to dig their heels in, but either way, I was ready. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control of my own life. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me like a heavy blanket. The house was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't the peaceful quiet I'd hoped for. It was tense, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next explosion. I stepped out of my room and into the hallway, noticing a few boxes near the guest room door. So they were packing. Part of me felt relieved. At least they weren't trying to fight me anymore. But the other part of me couldn't help feeling resentful. They'd put me in this position. They made me feel like the bad guy in my own house, and I was still grappling with how unfair it all was. When I walked into the kitchen, I found my mom sitting at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. Her face was lined with exhaustion, and she looked like she hadn't slept a minute. She didn't look up when I walked in, and for a moment, I wondered if she was going to ignore me entirely. But then she sighed and spoke softly. Your brother and Paige are leaving today, she said, not meeting my eyes. I grabbed a mug from the cupboard and poured myself coffee. Good, I replied. They should have left a long time ago. She finally looked up at me, her eyes red and tired. Did it have to come to this, Alex? I mean, eviction papers? Threats to call the police? I set the coffee pot down a little harder than I meant to. Yes, Mom, it did have to come to this. I tried being nice. I let them move in without asking for anything. I let it slide when they ate all my food. I ignored the mess. But when they tried to take my room, that's when I drew the line. You didn't back me up. You took their side. She sighed again, shaking her head. It wasn't about taking sides. I didn't want to see them struggle. Paige is pregnant. Alex, they don't have much. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. And whose fault is that? I didn't put them in this situation. I didn't tell Evan to quit jobs every 6 months or for Paige to act like she's entitled to everything. I've worked my ass off for this house, Mom. I bought it. I pay for everything. They don't get to waltz in here and act like they own the place. She didn't argue with me. I could tell she was running out of things to say, maybe even starting to see my point, but she still looked so defeated. Where are they going? I asked after a moment. To a motel, she replied quietly. At least until they figure something else out. I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. This wasn't my responsibility, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me into believing it was. By noon, Evan and Paige were finally packing the last of their things. I stayed out of the way, holed up in my office, but I could hear them moving around. Doors opening and closing, bags being dragged across the floors, murmurs of conversation. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I didn't really care anymore. Eventually, there was a knock on my office door. What? I called out, already knowing who it was. The door creaked open, and Evan stepped inside. He looked rough, tired, angry, and defeated all at the same time. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there staring at me like he was trying to figure out what to say. So this is it, he finally said, his voice low. Yeah, I replied without looking up from my monitor. This is it. He laughed bitterly. You're really doing this, huh? Throwing us out when Paige is pregnant? Some brother you turned out to be. I finally turned to face him, my patience wearing thin. Don't do that, Evan. Don't make this about me being a bad brother. I gave you a place to stay. I didn't ask you for rent. I didn't ask you for groceries. I let you live here for free, and you still tried to push your luck. You thought you could take my room. That's not on me. That's on you. Evan's jaw tightened, and he looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't because he knew I was right. Instead, he muttered under his breath, whatever, and turned to leave. Evan, I said just as he reached the door. He paused but didn't look back. You need to figure this out, I continued. You can't keep expecting everyone else to fix your problems. You're going to be a dad soon. Act like it. He didn't say anything, just shook his head and walked out. I stayed in my office until I heard the front door close for the last time. When I finally came out, the house felt different. The guest room was empty, stripped down to the bare mattress and a few stray hangers in the closet. The silence was deafening, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't suffocating. My parents were in the living room. My dad sat silently in his recliner, staring at the floor, while my mom sat on the couch, looking lost in thought. When she saw me, she opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I didn't give her a chance to start. I'm not sorry for what I did, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but I'm not sorry for standing up for myself. She nodded faintly, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like understanding in her expression. We'll figure things out, she said quietly. I just hope you don't hate us for how things turned out. I don't hate you, I replied honestly, but things have to change. I'm not going to let anyone take advantage of me in my own home ever again. She didn't argue. She just nodded again, and I left her there to sit with her thoughts. That evening, I sat alone in the living room for the first time in weeks. I turned on the TV and just sat there, finally able to relax. The tension that had been hanging in the air was gone. It wasn't the perfect ending, but it was the one I needed. For the first time in a long time, the house actually felt like mine again.